Right. So this week I wrote about vibe coding. And for those of you who don't know what vibe coding is the practice of essentially letting your AI do most of the coding, and you are just playing orchestrator, telling the AI what to do. And it's become ever more prevalent in Silicon Valley circles where efficiency is the most sought after metric. And so according to Y Combinator, a quarter of its Winter 25 batch, which was the batch that just happened, wrote about 95% of their code using AI. Now, there's been a lot of dialogue regarding this, specifically because, specifically regarding the whether or not this is a good practice, because AI code in practice as it is today is very notoriously difficult to service. What that means is after you release it to prod and you get a bunch of bugs, it's very hard to debug using human labor, and you have to get an AI to assist with debugging. And at that point, it's actually a lot easier to just rebuild the whole thing. Is the primary argument that's going around. Personally, I've done a bit of prompt engineering on my end, which is obviously not the same as programming, but if you give it the entire text, AI probably does a better job at debugging than you do. And I think Mark Cuban, I put this in the Substack as well. Mark Cuban said it best. Humans get it wrong too, quite often. Quite often. Be it code, be it math, be it facts, humans are wrong so often. So why not just cut AI the same benefit of the doubt, right? I think it's the same argument that people had for self-driving. I think we're having the same conversation with AI and LLMs all over again. Now, that being said, I wrote on the Substack that I see this as an opportunity for programmers to essentially outsource coding to AI, just the boring aspects of their jobs, and they can focus on solving the big issues. Uh, essentially become researchers pushing the boundaries and the frontiers of computer science ever further so that it gives AI more and more data that it's never been trained upon to become a better version of itself to solve real people's problems. So it like sort of solves the bottleneck of the programmer labor shortage that we've been experiencing or that we used to experience during the COVID era. I think this is a permanent solution, and now we can return to a new equilibrium where people don't become coders for the good salaries; they become coders for the passion of it, much like other professions such as physics and engineering and whatnot. Yeah. All that being said, I did want to mention a certain caveats that I neglected in this Substack. The biggest of which is like prompt engineering is more difficult than people imagine. And I actually had a conversation with my dev team earlier today, and one of the front end devs, he told me like, yeah, he was trying to get AI to code the login logic, and he kept facing errors, like it wouldn't let him log in. So he described the error to the AI, but then it would give him like crazy hallucinations, such as like it wouldn't let him log in, it didn't fix the issue, but like it would let him log in the second time, but then it deleted another portion of the logic that actually created some other issues, etc., etc. So it was an ongoing fetch quest for to catch bugs, essentially. Ultimately, what he ended up learning was, and this is the same learning point that I came to as well, you actually have to be super specific when it comes to your prompts. You cannot be vague when it comes to prompt engineering. And so, like, the unfortunate truth is the job description of a programmer is simply just going to change. So, what I see is the really passionate people who are really interested in understanding how computers work fundamentally and trying to leverage it to do new and cool things. these guys are going to become the researchers pushing the frontiers, and they're going to create the base level data that future LLMs are going to be trained upon to essentially code and fix problems for the layman of the future. And then you're going to have people with coding knowledge or a base level understanding of computer science. They're going to be prompt engineers to essentially help push code via AIs by caressing and essentially persuading the AI to give it the code that you actually need by prompt engineering. So programmers are just going to become prompt engineers, essentially. This is the convergence that many people saw coming from a mile away. And it's actually happening. Now, what do you need for this sort of future? What do you need to be prepared? I would honestly say try to program your own chatbot to do specific tasks. Like, I'm not saying just train the general chatbot, understand how it retains information and whatnot. I'm saying actually, like, pay for a service where you could train your own chatbot, train it on your own data set, and actually try to get a task completed. Build your own AI agent, build your own chatbot, build your own CS agent, etc., etc. Like, in my experience, everything I understood about LLMs and the way they functioned in theory was completely shattered when I started training my own chatbot. Through that exercise, I actually learned so much about how these LLMs actually function that coming out the other side, I fundamentally understood the limitations of this technology, and I actually didn't have that rosy of a picture of AI technology emerging from the other side. I had a more realistic view. I understood which sorts of careers that this was going to fundamentally replace, but understood the role that humans would have to play essentially as a human in the loop. I genuinely believe that everyone should have this experience moving forward as AI becomes more and more a part of the workflow. So yeah, there's that. And second, what I would also urge people to do is, just play around with other AI agents and then try to orchestrate workflow between them, essentially get understand how completions work and how the data is transformed from conversation to output. Because once you see that, I actually did try this as well, just like using ChatGPT. Once you see how the AI makes an output, what you realize is like, oh my God, not only prompt engineering, but like the output text, the JSON code and whatnot, it you realize you understand how it understood the conversation that you've just had. And this JSON code is actually very paramount to AI agents. ChatGPT calls this a completion. Essentially, you take the JSON code and then you feed it to another AI, and then it understands the JSON code, and then it executes upon a certain task. Or you could feed that JSON code through a JavaScript to a different, through an API to a different, like, a preset workflow, and then it just executes upon that as well. But highly technical knowledge aside, I think another thing that's going to be really important is your command of any specific language. Namely, I believe that English is going to be even more paramount in the future. Unfortunately, because so much of the data set that LLMs are trained upon is simply English. And because it's English, the more proficiently you're able to command the English language, the more accurately you're going to be able to describe your problems to a minute detail, and the more helpful these LLMs are going to be. Now, that being said, like that doesn't bode well for countries that don't use English as a national language. So, for example, Korea, where I'm currently residing, France, Russia, China. A lot of these countries are going to have to start translating a lot of the English materials to their own at a huge cost. In order to maintain the technological balance. I know like LLMs seem to work super well with Korean and whatnot and French, but fundamentally, it's limited in its output by its training data. It cannot give you an answer that it did not study itself. Uh, so naturally, you ask a question in English, it gives you a much better answer. You ask a question in French, it gives you the best answer that it can in French, but obviously based on the materials. If it's not a French specific subject, it's going to be worse. It is objectively going to be worse. Coding, unfortunately, is it's how do I what's the word? I'm losing it. It's dominated by English, and as a result, English is simply going to get you better code. Now, there are workarounds for this. I suggest like telling in the input in your prompt, say translate my input into English before analyzing it and giving me an answer, and then it will do that and then try to give you, and then also like you could explicitly tell it to refer to English language material for your output to help you refine your data. I mean, like, there are certainly workarounds, but those workarounds are going to cost tokens, unfortunately for you. So, in order to keep costs down and in order for you to keep performance up, I would suggest learning English, unfortunately. So it's looking more and more like this paradigm of American dominance, unfortunately, isn't going to end anytime soon. Surely there are attempts, but the training data, it's gone to the point where it's solidifying the order that we currently have in the world, as opposed to upending the social order that we have, if that makes sense. I don't know how to put it better into words. I'm pretty sure an LLM could do this better than I could. But yeah, that's all I really wanted to say today. All right. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, or complaints, please leave them down below in the comments, and I'll try to get to as many of them. Obviously, no one's left a comment yet, but whatever.